conversation. I've got a new friend here with me today, Laura Penhall. And before I let her say too much, I'm going to give you just a brief bio on her that we're going to get into some really interesting aspects of human performance. I think at the end of the day is where we're going to go. And I, for one, am fascinated, mesmerized by human resilience and the human spirit. And I know through Laura's work, she understands it a lot better than I do. So we're going to dig in. So I'm going to read a short bio. I know death by reading on camera, but it's going to be short. Um, Tennis champ Naomi Osaka, long distance cyclist Mark Beaumont, and the British Paralympic team all have one thing in common. The mental and physical preparation of these athletes was overseen by Laura Penhall. Laura is a physiotherapist by trade who is well known in the sports world for her work with high-profile athletes and as lead physiotherapist for the British Paralympic team at the Paralympic Games in 2010, 2012, and 2016. She is skilled at understanding the mentality of athletes and the challenges they face because she has truly put herself in their shoes. In 2015, listen to this, Laura was the team leader of the first all-female crew to row the Pacific Ocean, an incredible feat that is captured in the documentary Losing Sight of Shore, and that earned her 2 world records, which I did not know. Today is the 5-year anniversary of returning,
Yeah.
so I'm honored we're doing that. So that's cool. And then Laura embarked on this journey in hopes of gaining insight into what her athletes go through when faced with the question of wanting to give up. Since accomplishing the cross ocean row, Laura has founded a company, Adaptive Performance, that provides performance management support to optimize people's abilities and help them reach their potential on the field and off. We'll talk about that. Laura's specialties are focused on human-centered performance, and she thrives on helping people find the drive within themselves to overcome any challenges or obstacles in their way, even outside of the elite sporting world. Please welcome Laura Penhall. Laura, happy
Hmm.
anniversary. Thank you for joining me here today.
Thanks ever so much, Nick. And yeah, it's so great to have this with you today, or to chat to you today on a very poignant time for us. Yeah, 5 years to the day when we actually finished. So yeah, lots of emotional, nice, good memories right now that we're reminiscing on. It's great.
I love that. There's so much to talk about, but while we're on that topic, because I want to talk some about that road, but it is a subject of, and I'm picky about documentaries. I watch a very good documentary called Losing Sight of Shore. You should check it out. I don't want to give away all the punchlines here, so I'm not going to go so deep into that story because people can watch it, but we'll talk some about it. But one of the things I find that's amazing that people like, we've heard the phrase a million times, begin with the end in mind. All right, so you began with this
Mm.
idea to raise money for breast cancer, to test yourself, and you, with the vision, the dream of completing this, making world records. I mean, my understanding too, everyone talks about being the first all-female crew to row unassisted. I'm pretty sure it's the first crew to row unassisted, right? And
Yeah.
to accomplish many world records. But one of the things I find so fascinating about human performance and human resiliency, I was actually talking to some friends a few minutes ago at lunch about this. Like, I could climb Everest, but I really, the the adrenaline of being at the top of Everest or reaching Australia only lasts so long, right? So I
Mm.
think so many times we pursue these major life goals with an expectation that my life is going to be completely different after this, and it is because you found something in yourself that you proved to yourself you could do what you thought you could do in a way, and you tested yourself. But then there's sort of this, once that realization and the adrenaline wear off, we're back with more challenges, whether it's all these financial challenges, all these other challenges in life. And so I'd love to just go with you for a minute to like the journey, what the journey was like from something that took you years to set out to do. You
Mm.
accomplish it. It's very celebrated. I'm sure you're sore as hell. I mean, all these things and hungry and all the other stuff. Like, what was the next week, month, 2 weeks? Obviously, I'm sure some was just like physical rehabilitation, but what was that like? What was the mental journey coming back from this amazing feat?
Yeah, no, and it's a great question because I think it's so overlooked, and people talk about post expeditions of having the post expedition blues, and kind of dropping off that sort of just not knowing then what the next focus is. And And in all honesty, I knew those stories. I was aware of those. And I guess my personality type is very much about planning. It's always about goals. It's always that what's next, what's next, you know. So when we started the row, I was already thinking about what we're going to do when we get into Hawaii. When I get to Hawaii, I'm thinking about what we doing when we get to Samoa. We get to Samoa and I'm thinking about the finish line. When we get to finish line, I was then thinking about the Paralympic Games 2016. I was thinking about Rio and like, so we literally, yes, we celebrated at the finish, and that feeling, and like you said there, that adrenaline and all of those emotions, I to this day I can still draw on those and be so overwhelmed with kind of that sense of achievement, because there was so much in that, kind of from the feeling of just seeing my family and just how relieved they were that we'd finished. And I hadn't really put myself in that headspace of how much I'd put them through. So knowing that we'd done what we'd done and we got there safely and successfully was huge. And also everything that we'd overcome. And then it was like, oh my God, well, it felt like forever when we were out there. And now suddenly this finish line, you finish line and then you're gone, like you're past it. So that 9 months felt like it was 9 years when you're in it. But then suddenly when you finish, it's as if that 9 months didn't even have, you know, it was like a snapshot. It was really short lived. So there's all of those. But then also after that, as you said, kind of that sort of next week, next 2 weeks, I mean, I went back to work 2 weeks later. I kind of was like, right, you know, do the media stuff, get back. We did a media tour and we got back to the UK. And then sort of I was straight into, right, well, what's going on with my athletes? I've done this because I want to support them and I'm all about 2016. So with Rio, it's like, right, well, what's going on there? I need to get back up to speed with where those athletes are, what's happened in the last 9 months, kind of who's doing what's their performance and all this stuff. And so literally went back to work and they were like, what are you doing here so soon? Like, you know, you need to take some time. I was like, no, I'm fine. And then basically 3 months, you know, 2 months into it, we were traveling to Rio to do a dry run of stuff. And I was like, yeah, I'm fine. And then I basically crashed and burned about 3 months in. Was absolutely shattered, wasn't sleeping well, just was really mind blown on everything, of just like, to the point where, because you come back and you go back to your house, you go back to your bed, where you know you're thinking about that for so long in the middle of the ocean, but then you come back to it and it's all still so normal. And I think you have this sense of like, this shouldn't feel normal. I've done that, but this is now back into reality. This is like normal life and it should feel different. And it kind of, because it doesn't feel different, that's the bit that's the sort of the headspace piece that gets really confusing. And the point though with me, there were some things that had changed a lot. Like my best mate, when I'd left, you know, they'd just got married. I came back 9 months later. Not only had they moved house, got a dog, she got pregnant and had the baby. Like, I was like, oh my God, you're completely changed. Like, what is going on? And then another thing was, and this is really stupid, but silly little things. Like I remember getting on a bus outside of my house and in London, and I went to pay for it, and they were like, well, we don't take cash anymore. Like, I was like, what do you mean you don't take cash? And they're like, it was contactless. And I was like, what's contactless? And it was like as if we'd been into this warp for, I was like, have we really been away that long? Like, I know 9 months is a win, but seriously, I feel like we've just done a, you know, back to the future type thing. So in those early stages, there were elements that felt so normal, it felt weird. And then there were other things that seemed to have moved on, you know, beyond what I'd recognized. So there was lots of turmoil in that sense. And then, as I said, 3 months in, I physically had crashed and burned. I kept trying to do exercise and I couldn't. And I'd just get ill because my physiology, my kind of, you know, we'd just ruined ourselves and I'd lost so much weight and all of that. And then, of course, then, you know, a year down the line or so, again, you have those, well, now what? And even that 3 years down the line of thinking, yeah, but I've done the row, like how there's got to be something more now. It doesn't need to be a bigger expedition, but because that wasn't what it was about. But it is about, well, what's the next kind of, how do I apply this and utilize this in the best way possible to share this story and make the most of this?
I love it. Now, I have to ask you, and I think a big piece of this is that really when we set out for something, I've never done something that insane, so I can't speak to that. But when we set out to do these things, we really are setting out to prove something to ourselves and the world. I mean, we have a lot of these preconceived notions, but really, they're a dot in our journey, right, in our map. And
Exactly.
as much as I
Yeah.
hear it, I try to heed it. Life is literally about the journey, but we're constantly looking for what is ahead. And
Mm.
so I imagine being somewhat disconnected for 9 months was torturous at times and beautiful at times. And so
Mm.
and 9 months, you reminded me, 9 months is actually a long time. Like, day to day, that's like a long time to be out of touch. Before I move on, I got to make this comparison because it really sounded like when you were talking about getting back to work 2 weeks later, it sounds an awful lot like grief. It sounds an awful lot like these moments
Mm.
we're tested with where, we have a traumatic moment or event in our life, and we try to just push through it. We literally try to muscle through it because what you had just spent 9 months doing was pushing through and muscling through it. Yet you've now come to the end of that journey. So whether that's taking care of a loved one who has a terminal illness, or even a overnight someone is suddenly gone, or any sort of grief. I mean, what advice would you have for someone based on what you've been through, to maybe process whatever it is you've experienced, whether it's a major journey like you went, or just a major life event, or a grief event? Like, I don't know, what parallels could you draw for me there, and what advice would you have?
Yeah, no, again, great question, Nick, because it's there are a number of parallels, and I see it from a point of view of even in, when we travel away in a sport context, you go into a bubble. So it's about these bubbles that we might experience in different shapes and forms. And the closest I can relate to that is, when we go away in the Olympics, it's like you're closed off from the outside world for 6 weeks usually to do the Olympic Games and to prep and all of that stuff. And suddenly only you know what's gone on in that bubble and the team around you, but the outside, your family, your friends, other people have no idea what that is. So therefore you come out of that and it feels disjointed. You feel in a bit of a different space, and that can be frustrating. And like you say, from a grievance process, I think lots of things we actually do experience is akin to a grievance process. Like, we know that when we lose something, and this is where I've seen it in Paralympics, or sort of not Paralympics, but the journeys they've been on, somebody that's been injured significantly, they've lost a limb, they've, ended up being unfortunately spinally cord injured, they're going to be in a wheelchair for their life. That's a grievance process. They've lost the life that they knew, and they've now are on a path to have to remold that and to move forwards. And that's no different to losing a loved one and somebody you care about. It's the same kind of grievance process that you have to go through, that you've got to get to that point of acceptance. And to get to acceptance, sometimes there is this process of anger, frustration, kind of, resentment to the situation. And that's normal. Like, and that's okay to feel that. But it's about how long do you feel that for before you can move to get to that point of acceptance. And if you try and skip that and you go, everything's okay, it's okay, it's okay, actually it isn't, and it'll crop up later down the line, if you've not gone through the normal process of grievance, in that essence, when grievance is a crucial thing of a loss of a life that you've known. Now, in a expedition, in a sport context, and talking about, going to the Olympics or doing the row, that's different, obviously, for a number of reasons. But on a simpler level, I still apply a bit of a similar transition space. And for me personally, I use a bit of a 3 days, 3 week, 3 month rule. Well, not rule, but it seems to be very comparable to that. That if I've been in a bubble of some sorts, and therefore now I'm not in that bubble, I'm not in a life that I've just known for the past 6 weeks, 9 months, whatever, I kind of need 3 days in my own headspace. I need 3 days of nobody else outside of my bubble to kind of just be me, to wake up when I want to wake up, to watch a movie if I want to have no demands, have no expectations of me in that sort of window. And then usually it's about 3 weeks, it seems to take me personally, to get a bit more integrated back into seeing friends or other family that are outside of that bubble that I've just been in.
Right.
And for me to be able to articulate in a way that doesn't feel frustrating, that they don't understand what I've just been doing or what I've gone through, and vice versa. And then it's about 3 months to kind of get back into the real thrive of, right, what's next, what's forward thinking. And in essence, that's kind of built on that, in a way, the sort of much stronger, bigger level of grievance, where you go, it takes usually about 3 years to help to move forward in a grievance process. And even if I see people currently going through like a mental health difficulty of COVID right now, it's rife. It's, we're recording this in sort of a year down the line. There's people that still talk now about when we go back to normal, when we go back to the life that we knew. And it's like people haven't accepted what we're actually currently in. And until you get to that acceptance, you'll be in a transition space of frustration and denial. So until you can get to acceptance of this is what it is, only then can you start to move forward. And that's kind of how I find it is in a comparable space.
I love that. As you, by the way, I would imagine, well, not imagine, that also takes discipline. It's interesting, like, those 3 days to yourself. It's sort of like, I don't know, when you see someone else's mental health, or you can see someone making bad decisions, like, no, you just need to take a few days, like, oh, I got this. But like that, the taking those 3 days to yourself, and not like just, giving in to just going all out into the world, or, feeding yourself McDonald's all of a sudden because you want that, but your body's probably going to reject it, or whatever it is, right? Whatever your cravings are, to like let yourself have the time. There's a ton of wisdom in that. You're from England. Obviously, people can tell by your accent. That's a good thing. And you went to Oxford University. You knew you wanted to be a physiotherapist from young because your mother was a nurse. You got to see many of the angles of this. You saw how physiotherapists interacted with your aunt, or your aunt, if you're more more cultured than I am. But what I think is really interesting is you got into working with rugby players and sports, but where it really hit me was you started talking about your first job was working at the National Health Service in the trauma center in Oxford, and you noticed that people who came in with significant injuries, such as a lost limb, the same thing could happen to two people, but their mindset is what really set them apart. Tell me a bit about the differences of how two different people might come in from something similar, and how they would sort of attack it mentally, and walk me through where you started having that realization that, wait a second, it's a mind, obviously the thing that happened. The mindset is the thing I could affect. Tell me about that journey a bit.
Yeah, no, it's that journey of when you kind of also see it in a military context. If somebody unfortunately has got injured at war, and you've got two soldiers that have been blown up by an IED, then yeah, it's exactly that they kind of, I know stories where people have just woken up and gone, thank God I'm alive. Like, thank God I'm alive. I'm going to make the most of this right now. But then you've got somebody else that's woken up and same injuries, and they've gone, oh my God, why has this not killed me? Like, this is the worst thing for me. Now, there is, mindset is a big piece, but there's also, I'm not sort of ignoring the fact that it's also about multitude of factors that influence that mindset and influence that kind of approach, from who have you got around you that's supporting you, and how they sort of, the language they use, and kind of all of that stuff. Like, if you haven't got loved ones necessarily there, and you are needing to fight this on your own, like there's a multitude of things, that plus your experiences, from where you were before, what your ambitions were, all of these things, all a multifactorial in kind of how you're going to approach that situation. And it's okay. I think that's the biggest thing I would say, is it's okay to be angry with it. Like, that's normal. That's, as we said, with a grievance point of view, it's okay to be sort of angry for a period of time, but it's recognizing that's where you're in, and it's then recognizing how to move forwards and get out of that. And that, for me, when I was working in the trauma center, you would see that routinely. Unfortunately, people that have been in horrendous road traffic accidents. We're a trauma center of excellence, and yes, as physios, the point is you are aiming to always optimize function, return to kind of like, whether it's walking ability, neurological rehab if people have had head injuries and stuff. And it does amaze me, both by the sheer determination and mindset of an individual, but also that family support that's around them. And kind of I've seen that influence so strong with people that you think there's no way they're going to be able to function. And I've seen people be literally significant head injuries, not able to sit for themselves or talk or focus on anything, to a year and a half later they are up walking because they've had constant support from family members, and knowing, speaking to their family, their mindset is somebody that's very driven, very focused, and they're able to sort of draw on that. So there are those things for sure. And it's how we as therapists can then tap into that to really understand and listen to the person. And I think that's the thing that I get frustrated in a therapy space, is I see people want to just go through the wheels in motion from a career point of view, and you're like, no, there's a person sitting in front of you and this person is struggling, and until you understand why they're struggling and what their angers are, what their frustrations are, and help them to deal with that to move forwards, then you're never going to get the most out of that individual.
I love it. You have sort of a theme of seeing solutions, not barriers. And to me, that's
Mm,
just an interesting way of attacking mindset to begin with. I mean, if we see something in front of us, we can either turn back.
mm,
And by the way, knowing when to turn back, like you guys, we'll talk about that in a second, in the sort of first leg of your row,
mm,
is important too. Like you're not, none of us are robots. We're human beings. So knowing when to turn
mm,
back, but also seeing the opportunity for, this is a really interesting one because I have three kids, 15, 13, and 9. And
mm,
it's really hard to try to help them understand what, like, outside of the context of human boundary, which is very important, and sexuality analysis, but like when no really
mm,
means no. Like when, like
mm.
if sometimes my kids will ask a teacher something, I'm like, you gave up with the one no? Like, come on, like you don't do that at home. You like press and press and press. Like, but it's a really interesting thing for us to learn, and for me to teach my children, like how to be more persistent on certain things, because
Mm.
it's funny. I've taken my two older ones down to this orphanage in Mexico, and they, like, we've missed
Wow.
flights before, but we ended up getting on another flight despite how many no's I got in. And hopefully I'm serving by example and leading them by example of like, well, I'm going to be respectful, but like, I'm not quite sure this person, well, I know for sure this person is not as interested in me getting to where I'm going as I am. Like, let's just start
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Second of all, like, how can you respectfully keep pushing and being perseverant, but while being respectful? Like, I don't know. I just got thought it's just an interesting, because it's a really hard thing to teach.
I bet. Well, I mean, and that's the fascinating thing when you've got kids, like seeing them grow up, and then kind of, you've developed your own mindset, your own sort of state, but you don't know really where that came from to a certain extent. You know, your parents would have had an influence on it,
Right.
nature versus nurture and all of that stuff. But we don't start really asking those questions until we're sort of 18 years plus, those first 18 years of our life. We have no idea of the influences around us. Like we're not going to ask those questions. Our brains aren't, they haven't developed that much yet.
Right.
So kind of, but then as you as a parent, like I mean, it fascinates me, and it also scares the heck out of me for when I ever have kids, because I'm like, I am stubborn. I am absolutely stubborn as a mule. That is what has helped me get successful. But I'm like you, I will be tenacious when I think, no, I'm not leaving a stone left unturned here. Like, that is not answering my question, so I'll find a way. And I'm like, oh God, if I've got that, which has come from my mum, and I've now doubled it, then yeah, my kid's gonna be triple as stubborn as me. But yeah, it's all learning, isn't it? Evolving
and
as
it
a
and it
parent.
is, yeah, it's all learning, and that is the best part about it. If you can sort of surrender and learn. I learned a long time ago through some friends and through actually this Bible study I did years ago. Like, number one, so first of all, the funniest thing to me and my wife, I was laughing, I know it's a normal experience, but like, you expect your kid, like the first one, like to be exactly like you, because it's like, oh, it's like just a little me, and I'm, or at least have half of my tendencies. But then, like, my
Yeah.
first one is super introverted and shy, which I am not, if you couldn't tell. But I'm like, and so I'm like, now I'm trying to process this, and and then second, then we have a second child, and you expect, oh, well, it'll be just like the first one because it's just like another me and my
Yeah.
wife, and then not at all. Third one, not at all. And they're all three literally different human beings. They all think differently.
Yeah.
And so I learned a long time ago to surrender to the fact that, like, um, well, here's a great example. My son is turning 16 in March. And my parents, I had more love than I could spend, but things were tight around the age I was. And so they helped me as much as they could, but I saved my money. I bought my mom's old car from her. I paid for my car insurance. I paid for gas. Again, they helped whenever they could, but it was just the time in life.
Yeah.
We were immigrants and they were working through a lot of things, which was great. And again,
Yeah.
I'd much rather have a parent that's supportive than money and
Yeah.
no support. But, as I'm going through, like, looking at the journey for my son, like, you have to realize too, like, well, I had a job at his age. I said, but my life is not his life. Like, it doesn't need to be. And
Mm,
there's a whole, I think, a whole pride thing in parents where, like, they
mm,
do it for one of multiple reasons. Like, one, I'm doing it. You're going to have to do it because I had to do it, which is not always, many
no,
times, not
yeah.
healthy, or that's not
Yeah.
the way to think about it for sure. Like, I want him to have responsibility, but, like, what is his journey? How do I teach him the things I learned out of necessity? How could I
Mm,
nurture him there, and still he could get the same lesson? Number two, or it's like, well, I didn't have this, so I'm going to go to the hilt. So, like, I find, like, I'm not judging because it depends on where it comes from in your heart, but I think a lot of parents who buy their kids new BMWs or new Mercedes for their birthday, I don't think it's about the kid. I think it's about
mm,
their own ego, and, like, they want people to know I came from wherever and I can afford to buy that for my kid. It's so
yeah.
interesting as a parent, like, just navigating this stuff of, like, well, what the story I'm telling myself, the story I thought I understood, and then analyzing it through someone who you're trying to help experience a positive, healthy version of whatever it is you did. And it's just the
Yeah.
whole thing is just there's no instruction manual, as they say. But I think, I think it's really important. That's why I love conversations like this. Like, hopefully someone hearing this is like, oh, I feel better. Like, me too. Or they feel,
Yeah.
or like, oh, maybe that's another way I could approach it. And I'm always learning. I mess things up all the time as well.
That's
As you're looking at, sorry, go ahead if you have a response to that.
Well, no, I was just going to say on that point, I think there's also the element of it's really difficult. Like we have to learn as adults, we always want to learn as kids, as adults. It's got to be ongoing. But I mean, even now, your kids at the age of 15 coming into 16, it's a different generation. So
Right.
it's a different world. Like his world is completely different to the world you had at that same age. Like life, the world has moved on. We've had, various iterations of it. So therefore, it can't be the same replication. But then for your mind and your learnings to enable you to step into his life in a sense that you go, okay, I can see this coming at him now and I want to nurture him towards that. But it's hard, like, because you're only going to see life through your lens. So being adaptable, having a different perspective and a perspective as a 16-year-old when you're, 30s, 40s, whatever, then
Right.
yeah, it's hard for sure.
Yes, difficult. But uh, difficulty brings uh, progress and brings joy.
Yeah.
Just typically not instant gratification joy, which so many of us have become addicted to. You started getting into working with Paralympians, which I think is fascinating. You did the Paralympics in 2010 in Vancouver, Paralympic Games in 2012 in London, and 2016 in Rio.
Mm,
Let's talk about working with Paralympians. You talked a little bit about it, but one thing we talked early on in our initial conversations was it is interesting. The Paralympics is so broad that it people aren't quite sure what to do with it. But there's,
mm,
like, I mean, Oscar Pistorius is a sort of a tragic story of how we
mm,
look at, or probably one of our most of our first engagements with a Paralympian because he made it to the main stage of the
mm,
Olympics. But what most of us don't know is there's a whole other Olympics that's going on for Paralympians that in many cases is more mind blowing than people who don't have, these infirmities or ailments or these things
mm.
have happened in their lives. Tell us a bit more about the Paralympics, and we did address the fact that some of the inconsistencies with how it's treated. Some of it ranges basically from, like, Special Olympics to
Mm.
Olympics with missing limbs. So it is sort of hard to get a gauge on it. But talk about, yeah, just your experience in the Paralympics overall.
Yeah, I mean, I loved it kind of because, and I went into it because I always strive to find people's abilities over their disabilities. So that doesn't matter if you've got a twisted ankle or you're a single leg amputee. Like, it's about the person in front of you and kind of, any one of us tomorrow, unfortunately, touch wood, it doesn't happen, but any one of us could have an accident tomorrow and a massive curveball could be thrown at you and life could change. So, having worked through, I suppose, a journey where I've been surrounded by people that have been in a road traffic accident that wasn't their fault, and they've gone through life-changing sort of disabilities, unfortunately. Then kind of seeing from that end through to a journey where actually that's happened to somebody, but they've then gone on to be Paralympian. They've been able to create a new identity for themselves. That's what they're known for. They've found sport, and it's given them independence. It's given them control. All of these things that we just get so complacent with when we're able-bodied, and we're kind of we don't have any restrictions. And to think, like, again, I bring it back to the COVID stuff, but some people are so down on what COVID is right now. And it's like, but you don't see the different perspectives. Like, if you could just step outside of your own bubble, you'd realize how flipping lucky you are. You haven't been hit by a car and you're now spinally cord from the neck down. It's not taking you 3 hours just to get up in the morning and to maintain some independence, to have a shower, to get out the front door, to have everything adapted. And so I grab so much inspiration and motivation from the people that I've worked with that have then gone on to not only survive in life and adapt to find their abilities to just function in day-to-day life, cooking, cleaning, washing, whatever. They've gone from that into actually they're on the main stage. They're elite athletes. They're training at a top level. Even if that training is kind of adapting to make the most of muscles that they've got, which could be small muscles, that because they can only shrug their shoulders, but they're making the most of that to give them more independence, to give them more function, and then they're able to get onto a competing stage which is international, and they're learning to be able to adapt, to get onto planes, to maintain that independent lifestyle. I think there's so much to be taken from that, and it just certainly has made me feel like we just can't take life for granted. And it frustrates me when I see people that do, because they've not been exposed to it, and that's not their fault. But I'm like, if only you could expose that. And one of the films on Netflix that I love is Unbroken. If you've ever seen that film or you've read that book, I love that, because that just showed the tenacity, the perseverance, and how you can have a strong mindset to continue to believe and believe and believe and get the most out of yourself, regardless of the situation. And he's a great icon from that point of view of and that being a true story. And in the Paralympic context, that's basically what I just loved. I loved trying to help people find what their abilities were, see how much they could get out of themselves, and whether that was as a single leg amputee or whether that was somebody that had cerebral palsy, they had either a birth defect when they were a child or whatever. It didn't matter to me. It was about how can we get the best out of them, and the Paralympics gives that opportunity. And as a therapist, it meant I could be pretty holistic and adaptable to how I was approaching stuff. It was very outside the box, and I've gone from that back into the Olympic arena and elite sports world with British sailing on, with able-bodied, and we go to the absolute nth degree and nitty-gritty of trying to get as much function out of each particular muscle, tendon, physiology, so we just know the human body to the nth degree. And that's kind of why I ended up then setting up Adaptive Performance, because I wanted to take what I've learned from working with finding people's abilities, whether that's in Paralympics or Olympics or on the elite stage with tennis or whatever world it is, and applying that to everybody. Because the point is, we've all got different Pacific that we cross, and it isn't about rowing a Pacific, but it might well be there's a hurdle that's thrown at you, whether it's business that you're setting up, whether it's having a family for the first time, whatever it might be. It's going to be a challenge that you face with. And so I just like to support and help people to find their abilities, to find those solutions to overcome their Pacifics.
I love it. And I love one of the things that we learned from, you help people rewrite the stories that people are telling themselves. It's so amazing that we've heard it in many different ways, but the narrative we tell ourselves is typically, false. It's a self-constructed narrative, and I haven't been nearly to the brink that you have in training or rowing for 9 months. But I was invited to speak for Army Rangers here in the U.S. and they invited me to do their Army Ranger course alongside these soldiers who are about to deploy, and
Oof.
Multiple times I thought I was going to explode, but I was
I
like,
bet.
if these guys are doing it on both sides, I mean, they're in fatigues and they're about to deploy, like the least I could do is not give up, or like until I pass out, I will keep going. But it's amazing how it's sort of just that narrative goes away, and it's then all of a sudden like, oh, it's just I just got to make that next 100 meters, and then once I get to there, I just got to jump that wall. Once I get over that wall, I got to get to the next one, and you just start
Yeah.
you start working from a different space, which I imagine in super traumatic experiences is what your brain and body would do anyway. I just got to get
Yeah.
myself to the next whatever. I can't give up. I can't just let go. I got to keep crawling or walking or whatever it is. The other thing I love is that we had a long discussion about this. That human performance is what you teach, but you are more interested in the human. Like you
Yeah.
put the human over performance. You do a lot of athletic stuff, but one of the things I love is that you want to help people develop their full potential, not just on the field or the court, but in life. And I found it even more fascinating. That's what I ask you about. You found that people who have a well balanced life, they have other things other than sport, because that's what you normally deal with. They actually respond much better and perform better because they have a more balanced approach to their overall life. And sport is just a big part of their life, but it's not everything. I think that's really fascinating.
Yeah, I kind of, I mean, don't get me wrong, it depends what your goals are. Like, if somebody's setting their goal that they want to be a world number one at a very young age, then you've got to be laser focused in kind of making that happen if you set a timeline on it. But if you want to succeed in sort of life and still be that world number one or be that top performer, there's certain sports that, yes, by a certain age, you kind of statistic shows you have to have achieved X, Y, and Z in order for you to get up on that main stage. But there are certain sports where you go, well, you can develop all of that kind of, the experience, the skill, the kind of the physiology, the adaptation, all of those physical beings with it. But also, how do you give yourself that platform that means you've got other things to support you? So if you get injured, you're not feeling like that's the worst thing. Your identity is swiped out from underneath you. And I guess in the role as a physio, we see that too frequently, in that somebody gets injured doing the sport that they love, and then it's all about, it becomes so medicalized that, oh my god, I've got to get this knee back, I've got to get it back, got to get it back. And I'm not joking, you can see post-op, like you can predict who's going to have a blooming post-op infection, for instance, or because they're so drawn to kind of, I've got to get this, it's got to be on time, it's got to be this, and there's so much stress and focus on it, versus those that are like, right, I'm doing the right stuff, I'm eating well, I'm hydrating well, I'm going to take this rest, and I'm just going to let things heal, and then I'm going to do this. And they're just a lot calmer, they're more settled. And often those ones that are able to do that, either they've gone through a few things before, or they actually have a pretty good balance where they're in a relationship, they might have a business that they're running alongside stuff, or they've got ambitions they've gone and done education, or they're running sort of study and stuff alongside things, and they're able to balance things fairly well. And it's not that easy to balance things alongside full-time sport.
Right.
But there are some people that I suppose I see in our sporting history. If I take out, like, Jess Ennis-Hill is a very good example, which I'm sure you guys are aware of, in sort of heptathlon, in athletics. She's a phenomenal athlete, clear laser focus, absolutely optimizes the quality of her training, will turn up, but you can see it, like, when she's there, when she commits, and when she competes, sorry. But outside of that, she keeps her private life private, and has now, she's got a family and has gone on to do her own thing. But she's not been defined solely on that athlete status. She's not completely sacrificed all elements of her life. And there's a number of athletes that I see that are like that, that I just take my hats off, because I think, you know what, you've got the balance right. You've kind of, that if worst case scenario, something happened over here and your sport was taken away, you've still got a foundation of your pillars of you. And that's something I think is very powerful. And it is more and more coming into sport. I don't know what it's like over with you guys in America. We now have roles called performance lifestyle roles that are within the elite system. And that role is a discipline that is very much about, actually, how can we optimize this time in sport to transition when you come to transitioning out. So it's not an afterthought. It's not, when sport finishes, oh, right, now how can we help you into returning into reality? Not reality, that's the wrong word, but thriving in a business or in life which is completely disjointed from the bubble of sport. So there's those roles are starting to evolve, which is great, and athletes are starting to see the benefit of actually how it gives them something back into their sport and gives them energy and gives them sort of support system in place.
I love that. And a big part of it, balance is often hard to find, but I've always found, so you can always overdo it, but I've always found to an extent, the more the more things I have that I'm working on, like when I was in school, when I had school and sports and a job, I was really efficient at all three because it wasn't like, oh, I got 8 hours to get this workout done or to do
Yeah.
this homework, or it was like, oh, if I'm not efficient, I'm not going
Yeah.
to ever get this done, which it is finding that balance. All right, so you rode across the Pacific. There's a great documentary. It's on Amazon Prime right now. Everyone should check it out. Called "Losing Sight of Shore." You and three other women rode unassisted across the Pacific from, well, San Francisco. You got turned back at one point
Hmm.
to Santa Barbara, then to Hawaii, then to Samoa, then to Australia. So what? One doesn't just wake up one morning and go, you know what? I'm going to row across the Pacific Ocean. Give me a little bit of your journey of what, obviously, you were trying to challenge yourself. So tell me about what was going on in your mind that you decided the way I'm trying to challenge myself, this fits.
Yeah, yeah, no, it really was like a bit of a light bulb moment when I found out about ocean rowing, and it basically, I was looking for something for quite some time, and you mentioned it at the start about, climbing Everest. But for me, I was like, yeah, but that doesn't, it's not, excuse the pun, but it's not floating my boat, because, there's people that have done that, are doing that, and it's amazing. It's a great, but I'm not doing that. I didn't want something to be a tick box. That wasn't what it was about for me. I was looking for something that I knew was going to take me out of my comfort zone, was going to be a blank canvas to what I knew. I wanted to learn something new, and I wanted to be taken to a place where I was going to need to, it was going to take me to a place where I was going to want to give up, and I wanted to know what I was going to draw on at that point in time. And I didn't want to be able to give up. I didn't want to give myself an easy out, kind of, if you're on land, if we went with the row and we had a support boat next to us, like, it's an easy out. I've given myself a choice there. I just didn't want the choice. I wanted to stay, like, how could we do this, and what would my mindset go through? So
Really
when,
quick
like,
before you go on from there, I have a friend who wrote
yeah.
a book called Willpower Doesn't Work, Dr. Benjamin Hardy. And you
Oh,
need to meet him too, by the way. But the whole idea is willpower by nature, you will fail. But if you want to succeed, if you want to succeed at not eating junk food, you don't put junk food in your pantry. It's too easy to just say, well, just one more or just one more
exactly.
day. So it's creating an environment that
That's
forces
it.
the outcome that you want, which I love. I got to give a reference to that book there.
Yeah, no, I've just written it down. Thank you for that. I'll check it out. But I mean, on that note, it's lead behaviors. Like, how do you set yourself up for success? Like, rather than exactly what you're saying there, kind of giving yourself too many choices and options to fail at it. So when it was random. It actually came through on a Facebook message from a friend of mine who knew that for a few years I was looking for something. At the time, I was quite strongly involved in triathlons, just on a personal front. And so if it was anything that's to do with swimming, biking, running stuff, then it was basically, I was like, well, it just isn't that bit different. It just means I just got to train a little bit more volume in one of those sports that I'm already doing. So when a friend of mine reached out and said, look, there's this girl that's looking to put a team together to row the Indian Ocean at the time. Would you be up for it? She's looking for me. I was like, oh my God, I've never heard of ocean. Oh, I've always wanted to learn to row. Like, I mean, I went to Oxford Brookes Uni and therefore was in Oxford, Oxford, Cambridge rowing. Everybody knows how much they're hot on their rowing. So, but I never got to do it then because we were so full on with the course. So I always wanted to learn to row. And I was like, oh my God, this is it. And I specifically remember the next day, I can visualize it. I was walking down the hill from my house and I was like, oh my God, I can picture this. I can totally picture this is exactly what I wanted to do. So hence then it evolved, and then that road didn't happen, and I kind of ended up continuing to develop it, and was like, actually, has anybody rode the Pacific? And there's only one or two people. And then I was like, But I mean, and then somebody said to me about the race, New Ocean Wave race, which goes to Hawaii. And I was like, well, that's great, but that's only to Hawaii. Like, I can't say I've rode the Pacific if I haven't rode the whole Pacific. Is that going to be doable? And then I was asking more questions. And it was like, actually, it would be, but it's just a bit longer and we have to do this. So it evolved and it just grew and grew. And as you alluded to at the start, like, it should have taken, I thought, not should, I thought it was only going to take a year to get to start line. Obviously, it was a massive row. That didn't happen. I was absolutely gutted. But then I had just had the drive to want to keep going. The second year, we weren't quite there. Then the team fell apart because we'd already postponed it once. So fair enough. They couldn't commit for another year. And it was so, it happened 3 years. It failed in essence. And I was like, but there was something in me that kept on saying, there's going to be an all-female crew that are going to row this ocean in my lifetime. I can guarantee it. So why the heck can't it be me? What am I doing wrong? How do I see this from a different perspective? And that's where I started to then reach out to other people in my network to be like, I need your help. Basically, I'm clearly not seeing the right perspective. I'm seeing it through my own lens. I haven't got enough objectivity about this. How can I go about it? And each time I was pulling in more and more people, more expertise, and that's what evolved into what the road became. And it was strength of the team around us to get us on that start line in the first place, which made it happen, to be honest.
Absolutely. Now, one thing I'm interested about, because there's also this balance between surrounding yourself with people who can help you achieve the goal that you want, but also not surrounding yourself with people who are just going to tell you what you want to hear. And so what was the balance of that like? I mean, what was the percentage of people who told you this is nuts, you're an idiot, versus like, well, if you were going to tackle this, here's how I'd suggest it?
Yeah, I'd say it was pretty much 90% of you're an idiot versus 10% of let's figure this out. I mean, it is amazing about, kind of going through it. Even in those sort of first 2-3 years of trying to get the right team together and stuff, I was amazed. I honestly was like, I don't understand it. I do not understand how I can't find people with the same approach as me, the same. I just couldn't get it. Like, and it took me ages to sort of realize the different perspective and actually how people really rely on comfort and kind of their known and their own lens. I mean, I love my family dearly, and my parents were amazing, absolutely phenomenal. With kind of on reflection now, my mum pretending that she loved to see the boat when in actual fact it scared the living daylights out of her, seeing how small it was in her mind. But she never said that to me, because she didn't want to taint my vision and my feel with it. But at the same time, I remember specifically my brother's I'm sort of a bit more out there, and he's I mean, he works for McLaren. Like, he's an engineer. Everything is very sort of ordered and it is systematic. And he was like, well, you need to get the money together, and he just didn't think it was going to happen. And I was like, well, no, it will happen. He's like, yeah. And every so often we'd have a chat, and he's like, she isn't going to get the money. It's not going to happen. And then suddenly, obviously, about 2 months out, I'm like, no, we are actually going, Adam. And he's like, oh, okay, no, you've actually made this happen. And so and that's as close to me to know me. So the amount of people that were like, well, this maybe isn't happening, it's sort of not worked out to get to the start line. But I think as well, it grew legs because people saw the tenacity in me and kind of the belief, and also how thorough I was trying to be to not leave a stone left unturned. That in itself changed that percentage to start, rather than it being 90-10 at the start with people not believing, then by the time we did get to start line, then you're a bit more like 50-50 kind of, because they had seen how much effort and work we'd put in and that we weren't gonna give up easily, basically.
I love that. And again, you can see the whole journey in the documentary Losing Sight of Shore. Search it, find it. It's on Amazon Prime at the very least. It was on Netflix for a while. It's now on Amazon Prime. I think the last thing we will talk about here in our last few minutes together is your focus and a lot of your lessons through that experience, as well as what our conversation has been all about adaptable mindsets. And I'm sure your work with athletes, Paralympians, able-bodied athletes, adaptability, especially in this marketplace. I have to give a shout out. I have a friend named Ross who's from the UK. I should introduce you to. He founded a
Mm,
company that created the Adaptability Index. That it's actually something
brilliant.
you can work on. It's like a muscle. You can become more adaptable. And they do
Yeah.
big corporate and entrepreneurial engagements to help you figure out how to become more adaptable, because the number one skill to survive in the future is absolutely adaptability. So share with me a bit of your approach to adaptability and how you help your athletes as well as yourself sort of find that balance of
Yeah.
adaptability.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's a great highlight as well, because I mean, it comes back to the core. We are, as human beings, we've got adaptability as a skill set. Like, we've evolved as humans because we've adapted to survive. Like, when we take it as raw as survival, you have to adapt to survive. When kind of it's all hitting the fan, like, the only ones that are going to survive are those that have adapted to find a different way, and they've moved with the change. Those that get stagnant don't. So when it's as simple as life or death, you have to adapt to overcome. But life as it is now is much more comfortable. It's kind of, we've got so much choice, we've got so much at our fingertips, which is great. But as you were talking about, even with your son, like, kind of, there's just so many options, there's so many ways. So, like, how do you sort of create that sort of adaptability in a world where, yeah, we've got lots of choice? And that's kind of where, I guess, I've reached out to go and do expeditions to put myself in a position to make me have to work on that skill set. Um, there is ways. You've only got to look at, I mean, Phelps is a good example. Your Olympic swimmer, his coach, phenomenal coach. He's talked about how he sort of has done some work with Phelps in kind of making him adapt, like he had to. So if his goggles were smashed, or he left his goggles on the side for a competition, he would keep hold of them and be like, well, no, sod it, you need to do your competition without your goggles, because you could be in the Olympics and you get a crack in your glasses or something. What are you going to do? Give up? No, it's the Olympics, you've got to compete. So there's ways that you can manipulate some of that adaptive behavior. But it is innate in us. It's even in our physiology. Like, we're all having vaccinations now with COVID, like, and then our physiology adapts to building the antibodies, building that sort of whatever whichever one you're going to go for. But we have inoculations that kind of, our physiology adapts. So our physiology adapts. As humans, we've evolved in adapting in order to survive. So therefore, our mindset is only as restrictive as we want it to be. And if you actually can set up your environment and the sort of the way to make you sort of adapt and not give yourself too much choice, then that's the way that you start to see, actually, I'm not just gonna go out and buy another, I don't know, a different thing. Instead, I'm going to figure out how I can work with what I've got in front of me. If my laptop's not working, well, how do I use something else? Like, if I can't communicate via Zoom, how else can I communicate? I can communicate via phone. I can write a letter. There's multiple ways, but you sort of got to see the fact of how much choice we've actually got out there. And when you start to limit it, it's like when you have a power cut in your house, right? And you've lost electricity. It's like, oh my God, what are we going to do? We haven't got electricity. Okay, you go back to basics. You light a candle, you figure out ways to keep yourself warm, you put on layers, that sort of thing. There's ways that we can do it. And it's interesting sometimes by artificially doing that, in making ourselves, not cook on the same cooker, taking electricity away for a day and just figuring out ways that you cope with it, are very simple things in our day-to-day life that we can do to just draw on that skill set of adaptability that we've got in ourselves.
I absolutely love that. And by the way, back to mindset, if you can change your mindset to make it a game of how good are you really at your skill set whenever something goes awry, whether you go to do a presentation somewhere and your entire presentation goes out. If you could learn to embrace that experience, like, you will become so much better. It's just, it's so hard as human beings. Like we set our mind to something, like we want it to go the way we want it to go. And so
Yeah.
I would encourage everyone to sort of gamify that. When that happens, that Michael
Yeah.
Phelps' coach genius, like, no,
Yeah.
you can't have your goggles, figure it out, become better. I'm going to try, as bad as I'm going to be, I'm going to try to say, oh, an opportunity to get better than I ever thought I could be. So
Yeah.
I'm going to gamify this, and I encourage that mindset. Real quick, last question, really. I love the fact that when you set out to row across the Pacific, yes, that's insane, but I'll say it again. When you set out to row across the
Mhm.
Pacific, you realize that the outcome 200 and however many days later was going to be very determined way before day one rowing. So you started working on weight training or weight gain training, outfitting the boat properly. And I love that you asked this question. There is expertise out there. How do I surround myself with that expertise? Like, if you
Mhm.
walk away with nothing else, just think of that. Anytime you want to accomplish something, there's expertise out there. How do I surround myself with that expertise? Tell me a little bit about the preparation for the journey in the last few minutes. I guess what was harder? What did you think maybe that was easy, that was harder than you thought it would be? Or what did you think was going to be super difficult that was maybe easier than you thought it would be?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think what I thought was going to be easier was getting the right team together. I thought kind of actually if I saw it through my lens, like, and people that I had rapport with, then that was the right thing. But actually, that wasn't enough. I needed to bring in a psychologist. I needed to bring in external advice on that to actually get more of a broader spectrum of different personalities and actually being able to see where somebody's strengths are in an area where I'm not strong enough. So, and that being what the team needed versus what I needed in order for us to be successful. So, I think kind of that would be my biggest learning curve of what did I not see at the very start that I then learned from in that respect. Um, I think kind of what was the other? Sorry, I've gone off on a tangent there. What was the other bit that you asked me there?
Yeah, just what was harder than you thought it would be, and what was easier than you thought it would be as you prepped for all that?
Yeah, cool. So, and yeah, that was right. Sorry. And you were talking about surrounding yourself by the experts. And I guess that was it. When I started to reach out to my colleagues, it was amazing at the return that I got back. I think kind of it was, I don't ask for very much and I don't expect it. And therefore, but I suppose I'm in a role that I do give to other people. But yeah, I've never expected that. And to actually feel somebody being able to ask for help was really difficult. But then it was the most overwhelming feeling when it was given back. And it was the easiest thing. So I thought it was difficult to ask for help. And actually, when I asked for it, it was in abundance. It was all there. It was all there around me. And it wasn't, and it really taught me to sort of go, actually, I don't need to hold all this information. I don't need to know every single bit about every single pathway of this because there's experts that know this. So if I can just tap into that expert, and that's not stealing their ideas or stealing their sort of expertise, it's just about the success of the journey. So as long as you can see that as collaborative and it's for the common goal to get to somewhere, then that to me is one of the most powerful things.
I love that, and uh, all of that is worth listening to again. I think for sure we can accomplish so much more when we let go of the ego of having to do it all and find
Yeah,
people who are specialists and experts. And it's actually way more fun when you just do what you're great at. It's and let everyone else
exactly.
do what they're great at. Laura, thank you so much. Everyone should check out Losing Sight of Shore. They should follow you on Instagram and whatever social comes up after this. That just search you, find you. Is there anywhere particularly you want to direct people if they want to learn more about how they can work with you?
Yeah, you can head to my website, so adaptive-performance.com. Otherwise, yeah, reach out on social media, just my name, Laura Penhall, on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever works for people. But yeah, reach out. I'm always happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. Well, thank you as always for your time. Can't wait to do some more work with you. And I highly encourage everyone to go check out
Yeah.
Losing Sight of Shore. I'm excited to see what you do next. Thanks for joining me on this new episode of Now to Next, and we will see everyone next time. Take care.
Thanks, Nick.